Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast Radiohead Retrospective, where we cover the studio discography of the rock band Radiohead. In order, last week we discussed the often controversial record Amnesiac. So if you didn't see that, go check it out, because this week we are going to be covering Hail to the Thief.
Indeed. So we talked last week
Tyler,
about
why don't you give us some background on Mr. Thief?
Mr. Thief. Yes. So Amnesiac we discussed last week, and I made a kind of big song and dance of it being the weirdest, kind of most strange and like sort of confronting a Radiohead album. Obviously a product of that very specific time when they were kind of in that very insular headspace making that and Kid A. And so it has to be impressed how pointedly and remarkably different the approach to recording, composition, basically everything about Hail to the Thief is relative to that record. Obviously, it's still recognizably Radiohead. Obviously, there are still some of the same broad themes, but in many ways, this is Radiohead pointedly trying to upend expectations again by making a record that is as freewheeling, as loose, as live sounding as anything they've ever done. They focused primarily on live takes rather than overdubs, as they did with OK Computer, but they made a real sort of point of, with this record, trying to capture a live feel, trying to capture a sound that is more organic and less kind of focused on effects in the way that Amnesiac and Kid A were. Like even Johnny said that he made a point when recording Hail to the Thief to try and avoid using too many guitar pedals or any guitar pedals at all where possible, and just to try and force himself to be creative with just the instrument. And obviously he does that in spades, different parts throughout this record, continuing as well with his fascination with the Onde Martineau, which also features on this record. So it's very much still recognizably Radiohead developing and moving forward, and definitely not being the same band that made a record like OK Computer, but it's also still a Radiohead that we haven't really heard before on this album. It was recorded at Nigel Godrich's studio in LA, which was a big deal to record the record entirely in the US. And also it was recorded in 2 weeks, which, I mean, when you consider the protracted development of Kid A and Amnesiac, those were records that from start to finish took like over a year to make. We're talking like the production of Eyes Wide Shut level protracted with those albums. Comparing that to Hail to the Thief, it often gets called things like Radiohead's kind of garage rock record, or Radiohead's kind of like immediate back to basics album. And those are kind of reductive labels that definitely do the record a disservice for how diverse and interesting it is and how much of a development of Radiohead's identity it is. But they also speak to a certain aspect of this record's looser feel that does feel, I mean, at this point in Radiohead's career, uncharacteristic for them. I'm sad we're not able to be joined by August this week, because I'd love to hear his take on how he feels it is either characteristic or uncharacteristic for Radiohead at this point in their career. But August will be back next week to talk about In Rainbows. But I'm sure the three of us can describe and talk about, you know, the effect that this record has and the way that it distinguishes itself from other Radiohead records in lots of interesting ways. You get a continuation of the interest in electronics, but instead of being like programmed and overdubbed stuff, a lot of the electronics you're hearing on this record are instruments, electronic instruments being played live, you know, while other things are happening, while Phil's on the kit or whatever. And you have textures that are overlaid and stuff. And I think there's certain tracks on here like Go to Sleep where Johnny uses Max to feed the band's loops or the band's playing into the computer and create kind of a glitchy effect at certain parts of the song. So you still have some kind of technology studio stuff happening, but more or less this is the most kind of unguarded Radiohead record in terms of sound and production up to this point in their career, maybe since the early stuff. So yeah, there's that. And also there is the mind state going into this record, the themes, the ideas behind the record. Hail to the Thief is quite a confronting title, right? It refers to a popular protest slogan that was happening around the time in reaction to the responses of US President George W. Bush and UK Prime Minister Tony Blair to various world crises that were happening, and just the general incompetence of these men in running their countries. And obviously, this would all feed into the war on terror, which was basically at the doorstep at the time this album was made, and also comes out of the just absolute devastation of the wake of 9/11 as well, which is, obviously an American tragedy, but still filters through into the mind. It was an American tragedy that nonetheless changed the world and affected the world and changed the mind state and emotional state of being of everyone in the world, regardless. And of course, Radiohead recording this in the US is meaningful in this regard too. So you have that sense of the political climate that this record is rooted in being inseparable from these songs, despite the fact that Tom did make a point in interviews of saying that not a single song on this record was written as a political song, meaning as a response to specific political events, but that the songs were written channeling the energy that Tom was experiencing at that point in his life. And that itself was largely informed by what was going on in the world, by the sense that people in power were abusing their power in ways that were more galling and more just genuinely devastating to the world than they had ever been in his lifetime. And so that is suffused into songs like Wolf at the Door, for instance, the closing track on this record, where there's genuine feeling of mania and disorientation in Tom's vocal delivery, in the things that he sings about, and the way that he throws you into this world of disarray. And of course, it's mirrored with, what probably makes the most sense to sort of really dig into first, the opening track, which sets the scene of a Orwellian world with that title reference of 2 + 2 = 5, where everything is wrong. Everything is in this state of disarray, of imbalance, but yet the powers that be, or the kind of general forces that are behind everything, are trying to convince you that things are fine, and are kind of encouraging this sort of willful ignorance. I'll stay home forever. And so that is immediately what this record throws you into as it opens. The first thing you hear on the album is the sound of like something getting plugged in, I think, which immediately, again, brings that studio sound into the record, brings that sense of liveliness, of like capturing something rather than manufacturing and perfectly sculpting something like the last two records feel like. So yeah, what do you guys think of this record as a whole, the thematic approach of this album, the feel of it in comparison to the past, the recent Radiohead records that preceded it, and if you want to dig into some of the songs as well, go for it too.
It's so strange to talk about this album just because it's something that, like, on paper, all of it, it's like, not all that it all shouldn't work, but I guess it's really that it's like, I guess the album's very emblematic of its album cover, where you have these ideas, all these colors, and they're all in these blocks, and they're all contained, and they're all kind of shoved together. And that's more or less what the album is. It's just kind of very distinct colors, palettes, and ideas that are very self-contained, and they're all kind of congealed together. We talked about how on Amnesiac there was just a lot of disparate parts and different things, but like they kind of evoked sort of the same challenging, frustrating, dark mood. Whereas here, this is just so full. It's a little bit like, I'll go ahead straight off the way and kind of give away the game and say that I really like this album. I'd even say that I love this album. It only really suffers for me in being a little bit, dirty word, transitional, in that I think Radiohead are playing with a lot of really, really interesting ideas, and most of them really, really work, because these songs are so ambitious and well defined and structured, and they're a lot of them are just some of the best material they've ever cranked out. 2 + 2 = 5 is a wonderful opening. I love how the song just like, it becomes the most, well, not like conventional just because it's got so many different parts in it, but like 2/3 of the way through, the song just kind of bursts apart and becomes the most traditionally sounding rock song since like Pablo Honey. And it just kind of goes, and the vocal deliveries are aggressive, and then it just kind of like melts away, and there's all these like really, really, like this is a very textural album, lots of like just kind of like fuzziness of different instruments, feedback, synth pads, fucking all this kind of cool shit is just thrown into this album. And I wouldn't say it's cohesive, but it has a really distinct, defined manic energy that I really, really love. On the song after that, Sit Down Stand Up, is just so fucking eerie. It's evoking this, this idea of almost like a call and response of being like blind to authority and just sort of like, doing as you're told. And I love the way that like so many of the instruments on both of these songs are like really, really intimately mic'd so that you hear them at like the front of the mix, but like Tom's voice is kind of lost throughout it. And I think that really like it channels a certain intimacy that like gets to the heart of a lot of the emotions of this album, disregarding the political stuff, but it also really represents how it is to feel caught adrift all of these problems and caught like amongst all of these things that are just kind of swallowing you. But it's the intimacy of this album that really lands. Favorite song on, I'm not going to like go into like a big protracted thing because I think this is more of an album that suits like a discussion thing, but like the first 3 songs on the album I just think are a good launching off point because they really do give you almost a sort of sampler of what the whole album is going to be like. But Sail to the Moon just sort of starts off with this really gently lilting piano. It's one of my absolute favorite Radiohead songs, almost purely from the way it starts, but like just there's so much definition here. And that's why, despite being as disparate as something like Amnesiac and almost as like that just has all these colliding ideas, is that there is such definition to these songs and such form, and the form suits the function this time around, and I really just get it. And even when the album ventures off into being a little bit more experimental, into those transitional moments that I think a lot of, oddly enough, I find a lot of what they would do later on The King of Limbs evoked on this album, way they sort of play with some of these more like artificial kind of looping textures that'll just sort of like happen in songs. Some of those moments really work for me, and they sort of piece the album together. They sort of just let it's a really mellow kind of meditative listen at points, and some of them, like a couple of them, can meander just a little bit too long. I'm not a big fan of that, but for the most part, I mean, like 80% of the time, it really works for me. And I think this is just a fascinating album to discuss because every song on here is just like, I know we've been saying this basically since OK Computer. Every song on here is just so different from the one before it, and it's a way that like challenges and excites me in a way that Amnesiac didn't quite get.
Yeah, I'm of a very similar mind on it. Um, I think the best way to describe how scattershot this album is, how wildly it varies on an almost song by song basis, is that it's both a feature and a bug, not one or the other.
Yeah.
And like, cause like I find the way that it, you know, bounces from one idea to the next, almost like a compilation album would. Um, which is a complaint that I similarly leveled at Amnesiac. That I find it so fascinating to keep up with, and I think it's like, despite how sort of grim and post-apocalyptic the emotional tenor of most of these songs are, I find it to be like a really fun listen. Like this is probably the
Oh,
Radiohead album that I
totally.
have the most fun with, partially because so much of it just goes.
Second
Particularly
half of
like
Sit Down, Stand Up be like,
oh yeah. It gets
and
the
the
people going.
raindrops and the raindrops.
Oh, it's good. And like the last, well, not the last, but the part where 2 + 2 = 5 really goes. It just I like never once has that lost its effect. I don't know. It's such a strange album, and one thing that I will definitely levy against it as like a hard-bodied criticism is that it is just I do think it is just too long. There's just a bit too much stuff on here, and it could have been trimmed back. And it'd still be longer than Amnesiac, but I think that's the length of an album like this that you want to aim for, you know, relatively speaking.
I'm in a weird
Yeah.
place where I actually think this is the perfect length for what this album wants to be. It's just that some of the songs aren't up to snuff, which I guess we can agree on. And perhaps I will have certain songs that I think are not up to snuff that you maybe disagree with me and think are actually good. But how I want to approach this record is that because I already know from the outset that I'm the person who enjoys this the least of the three of us. But the way I want to approach this is like when we talked about Amnesiac, I mean that was basically a discussion of that album's messiness and the way that album, is deliberately kind of confrontational and ugly in a way that is part of the point of what it's trying to get across. And I think that the messiness of Hail to the Thief is equally purposeful as well. Like it is part of
Yeah.
it's more in a meta way, I guess, because it's kind of Radiohead flexing their instrumental muscles, Radiohead refining all of the various aspects of their sound that they've unlocked across OK Computer, Kid A, and Amnesiac in those separate records, and trying to infuse all of those into those disparate parts into this one record that shows off how they've refined all of those various aspects of their sound. To me, the reason why I think this is a less successful album than Amnesiac is that it's really where the messiness was integral to the effect of Amnesiac, whether that effect was positive or negative for you. But obviously, because it was positive for me, the messiness of Hail to the Thief is its greatest weakness because it doesn't mean anything other than Radiohead just flexing how varied and interesting and good they can be in all these various different modes, which would be fine if they were consistently flooring in this process of doing that, which they aren't on Hail to the Thief. But look, I'll start with the positives because I think we can. The songs I love on this record, I know we're all going to universally agree on, without exception. 2 + 2 = 5 is incredible.
Banger.
We've talked about how that song goes, but like above and beyond that, the way it's structured is a huge part of the effect of that. Like the way it builds up very slowly, that loping, repetitive guitar line that it opens with, that kind of feels in a weird time as well that you can't quite get your hand around, and just the general doom of the way that Tom sings, and then when he rises to this, the devil's way, that part is goosebump inducing. So even before you get to the big breakdown, the song has shifted through these various different parts where it's evolving in front of you in a way that's really exciting, and then it all kind of comes crashing down with the "you have not been paying attention" thing, which is just amazing, especially because while it's going off, you have those hanging sort of arpeggio guitar lines from Johnny, so doomy, so scary sounding, just ever present over top of all of that. And then that fucking last like 30 seconds of the song where it kind of has this swing groove to it that comes completely out of nowhere. That's where the song goes from like a 10 to an 11 for me. And that's the holy shit. It's the most balls to the wall, ballistically creative that Radiohead have sounded. One of the songs where that is the most like holy shit in their whole sort of career so far. I mean, maybe since Paranoid Android have they not been so varied across a single song but made it all kind of come together. And it's amazing. It's an absolute godly masterpiece of a song. And other songs that similarly show Radiohead flexing their muscles in terms of the real kind of intensity that they can bring when they're really like locking into their arrangements. We also have to talk about the absolute masterpiece, my favorite song. Oh, actually not my favorite song on the record, but I mean, one of the most emblematic, There, which I think Tom has spoken on many times. Tom has spoken many times about when they recorded this song. He was like, instantly, this is the best song we've ever made. when they finished making it. And you know, it's easy to see why, because it has so much about it that's so purely Radiohead in terms of the musical creativity, but also it's so like, it's just a really great, catchy, gloomy, but also really propulsive song. Like, this is a dour track. Like, that refrain of "just because you feel it doesn't mean it's there" is just nasty. Like, it's depressing, and yet the song has such a pulse to it that you almost forget how bleak that is. Phil Selway's drumming on this track, I think, is the best drumming of his entire career. The fills are just stellar.
It's to such a degree, the percussive nature of this song is that when they play it live, Johnny has a smaller kit that he plays, and I think Ed does too. But like, you know, a fucking clown and Slipknot over here on a trash can.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, with the big drumsticks and stuff, you can see them. Yeah, totally. Like that huge rhythm section as well. Well, this is an album where Colin Greenwood as well is given a lot more room to flex his rhythmic muscles too, across a lot of these tracks too, and he's really, really integral to the album's best moments as well. So why this is a classic Radiohead song is that it's all five of them coming together to, you know, create this textural just minefield of interesting sounds and rhythms and melodies, and of course just blowing it all up in the final sort of stretch of the song, and Johnny giving this just absolutely gnarly solo that feels like a real sort of cutting loose moment after several records that are just defined by their characteristic uptightness. This is like Radiohead relieving themselves of that, or trying at least to get people to stop saying that about them, I guess, that they're an uptight
Well, it's
band.
because of Amnesiac, I think. They sort of like had that looser formation on that sound, that jam band sort of jazzy thing. And now they've sort of put that and integrated that into their sound in a really cool way.
Yeah, definitely. I will say they do it successfully on some songs and they do it unsuccessfully on other songs. It's a mixed bag for me, but when it all comes together in a song like There, it's breathtaking. And I alluded to Wolf at the Door earlier as well. I think that's another incredible standout, a great closer, one of their best closers, honestly, if I'm brutally honest. It's that warped sound that it has, that kind of like, Tom spoke on the creative process of making this album as well, that he was influenced by nursery rhymes and stuff, and like the kind of language of like old classic sort of Aesop's fables, sort of you know, Hans Christian Andersen stories, where there's like, you know, a real sort of ugliness to them, despite these kind of really kind of playful imagery. There's a real ugliness to the stories themselves, and part of that is that this was the first album that Tom made after having a child, his first son Noah. And so you can see that Tom would have been reading nursery rhymes. Tom would have been reading children's stories to his newborn son, and you can see how that's filtered into the songwriting process, especially on a song like Wolf at the Door, especially because a lot of these songs have these kinds of like animal imagery throughout the record, that where you have like images of like wolves and stuff, and rabbits with myxomatosis and all these kinds of like corrupted natural ideas that come out of those kinds of stories. It's a great little development of Tom's songwriting style on this record, and a kind of defining characteristic of how these songs are written, that I really, really love. And of course, the influence of, you know, Tom being a father is leading right into one of the greatest Radiohead ballads. Jake's already mentioned it, "Sail to the Moon," an absolutely breathtaking song. I think, Jake, you said that like even from the opening measures, it automatically feels like an amazing like, classic song. I think part of that is, again, one of the things that people who are super into music theory will tell you about why Radiohead's great is that it's musically unconventional. Like, the chord progressions in this song are strange, they're dissonant, they're dark, they're weird. The song doesn't quite melodically go where you expect it to. It almost like rises up and then collapses, and then rises up and then collapses in each iteration of itself, of its melody. And the way Tom comes in over it is so like, it's kind of shocking and terrifying. He almost has this kind of spectral presence, in this song, where it feels like he is kind of hanging above everything and observing in this kind of godlike fashion, which is also a quality of another song on this record that
It's
I'll
like a
get to.
mirror universe version of Pyramid song.
Yeah, yeah, it's slower, it's more somber, it's just really suffused in darkness, but also the hope that, you know, his son and the generation that will follow him will be able to salvage something out of the, you know, and which is, you know, funny because the generation he's singing about, his son's generation, is our generation. In this song, so it's a song that essentially is singing to us to save the world, which you know, from any other boomer or in a less kind of, you know, articulate way would be like offensive almost, but it's not like that in this song because it's a song about the despondency of existing in this particular time and, you know, wanting to have hope that the future will bring something better, but also having this uncertainty that you don't know what things are going to be like for that future. It's an absolutely heartbreaking song. I can't say enough good things about it. Yeah, I'm getting a bit carried away with myself now, but I'll take a break there and let you guys kind of come back in and talk a little bit more about the record if you want to.
Tom York invented the piano.
He did. Good for him.
Yeah, it's almost like I think "Sail to the Moon" in particular is why I'm comparatively speaking not as hot on Pyramid Song as the rest of us seem to be. Even though I love that song. "Sail to the Moon" just feels like it's more, it's fuller, older brother that I just like a lot more.
Yeah, the emotional, I guess, emotional standpoint of the song is a little more immediate and kind of gripping, which is not to take away from Pyramid Song, which is still an S tier track
Yeah.
in my opinion as well. But there is like a real, just Sail to the Moon almost feels more Radiohead and just how like purely hopeless it is. Well, not hopeless, I guess, but like purely just dour and upsetting it is
Resigned.
to listen to. Yeah. It's like Tom wrestling with these emotions of I want, you know, I want the future to be better for my children, but also like I recognize the pressure that's going to be on my children in the future to make that world better. And this notion of like building us an ark and sailing us to the moon, obviously referencing the fact that his son is called Noah. You know, it's a very powerful imagery, and it's kind of, again, it's that sort of like almost childlike simplistic imagery that ties back into some of those you know, fairy tales and stuff that was influencing the writing on this record. It's a beautiful moment where it all just coalesces into this heart-stopping ballad. My favorite song on this album, and it seems a weirdly underrated song. I don't think it's super underrated. Like most Radiohead fans love it, but like I feel like I love this song maybe more than most people. It's the track "Where I End and You Begin," which
Oh yeah.
is to me there's like something that happens when I listen to this song where I kind of go into this suspended state of like I can't even describe it. It's fucking terrifying. The shuffling beat,
That opening like theremin thing, like
that's
what the fuck even are those sounds?
that's your on day man. No, that's Johnny coming back in with his electronic keyboard theremin thing, and it's the best usage of that in any Radiohead song. I think it's
Lord
genuinely.
forgive me, it's time to go back to the old me.
It sounds like, you know, it sounds like a fucking distorted scream of pain. Like it's awful to listen to. The shuffling rhythms that Phil lays down as well are so claustrophobic in this song. There's no space in the drumming. It's really kind of cluttered in a way that really accentuates that feeling. And the also Colin, yeah, Colin's bass groove, which sounds like it's been chunked and turned up to 11 and put at the front of the mix. It sounds menacing as hell in this track. It's just ugh. Like the way it kind of melodically modulates as well from the throughout the song too is like ugh. And then just Tom's singing and lyricism in this song is again so sort of despondent and hopeless. It's and the moment where the song kind of settles into this real kind of like repetitive groove in the back half, and Tom's vocals are mixed up to, and there's reverb layered on them to make him sound kind of gigantic as he kind of murmurs, "I will eat you all alive" over and over again. It's just mind-boggling. It's pure Radiohead to me. It's one of the most definitive moments of Radiohead, and I cannot get past it. Every time that I play through this album, this song always stops me in my tracks just for how arresting it is for all of those things.
First time I heard that
Uh,
song, funnily enough, was in Rainbow's basement.
Yeah, they do play it
Thing.
there. It just doesn't get talked about enough, that song, and it's perfectly
Yeah.
emblematic of all the feelings that this album gets at, that sense of disconnection and hopelessness in a specifically kind of cultural, societal context or subtext. Killer, killer, killer. And there are other moments on the record that I think are interesting experiments as well, whether or not they come off entirely. Like I particularly love, like, my favorite parts of this moment of this record, by and large, are when it really leans into the almost cabaret darkness of it. Like when it really like leans full tilt into the weird Mingus-esque just horror show of it. And that, I mean, the specific example I think of there is "We Suck Young Blood," which is just this,
fuck.
it's just this kind of
E
protracted,
piano.
yeah, it's this kind of protracted jazz ballad thing that has these kind of
Hand
like
claps.
deathly hand claps and ghostly backing vocals. It it truly feels like the song is embodying the kind of zombie-like political figures who are kind of ventriloquists behind the scenes of a song like 2.2 2 plus 2 equals 5 or Wolf at the Door. Like, again, without spelling these things out too directly, you get a sense of what's being evoked. The vampiric metaphor that's used in that song, and the deliberately kind of fuck you jazz breakdown that happens about 3 minutes into the song and then just kind of disintegrates back into the original. It's a really good song. It's a super underrated track as well. And I think it doesn't get enough appreciation because people, I guess, get hung up on how weird it is while forgetting how perfectly in tune and in sync it is with the rest of the album and with the
While
sort of
forgetting that they are listening to Radiohead.
yeah, absolutely. But that said, I do think there are other moments on the record where the band's experimentation, or the band's, I guess, trying to further the reaches of their sound, or trying to kind of explore where their possibilities of their sort of electronic side don't really come off all that well. And specifically, I am not really particularly enamored with the gloaming, which I think has an interesting sort of creepy vibe to it that's certainly, in sync with some of the creepier vibes of a song like We Suck Young Blood, but feels a little rudimentary and almost demo-like to me. It doesn't quite feel fleshed out in all the ways that it could be. And I do hate to say that. One of my favorite sort of details of this record's backstory is that the gloaming was one of the working titles for this album. And I like Hail to the Thief as a title. It's a very kind of pointed, punch you in the face title that suits a pointed, punch you in the face album. But I also think the spookiness that's evoked by the gloaming would have perhaps have been an even better encapsulation. But I'm not hot on this song. Unfortunately, and perhaps even more controversially, the other kind of primarily sort of electronically driven song on this record, Backdrifts, I'm also not really into.
Damn
either,
it.
I hate to say. I like the way that this song sort of develops and embellishes itself. Like the piano that comes in is a nice touch and a good counterpoint to the kind of really heavily synthetic electronics. And I don't object to that brittle electronic sound in and of itself that is in Backdrifts and the gloaming. It's not that in principle that I object to. It's the way that they kind of hang on that as the bedrock of the arrangements of these songs it just doesn't really suit that. And I find particularly as well a song like Backdrifts to be a good example of where I think the record tends to become a little repetitive and kind of goes on a little bit too long on that track, which is over 5 minutes long and could easily handle being 2 minutes shorter. And yeah, it's just a moment where I feel the pacing of this record is off at certain points like that too. Like it just doesn't feel like it's building on the swell of the parts of the record that precede it. So yeah, those two in particular stand out as moments on the record that I don't love, even though I like certain elements about them. But I'd love to hear from you two on those songs and how you feel about them.
Yeah, I won't even lie for a single fucking second. I love both of those songs immensely. I I won't even say that I like always loved them. I fucking say it with me, kids. I think that a lot of the reason I'm really into both of these songs is because of a little group called Autechre. And it's because, like, I mean, am I wrong when I say that these are probably the two most heavy IDM influenced songs on this record? Because, like,
Bob and Seamus.
Well, yeah, there are songs that are where the bedrock is that electronic instrumentation, which I mean, it's
yes.
being played live. You can hear that live playing in it. It's not overdubbed. It sounds really like punctual, and it's put into the mix decently. It just has a brittleness to it, and again, that repetition that just ultimately leaves me feeling a little bit cold in a way that some of maybe their reference points don't. It feels like and I don't have necessarily an inherent problem with skeletal Radiohead songs. There are a number of them on Amnesiac that I love, but here it feels like they just seem a little out of place, and I don't really know how to reconcile them. But I'd love to
I guess
I'd love to have someone make me feel differently.
I mean, I can't make you feel different. I mean, like, that's the thing, is that I just think that, like, the difference is that is like the songs on Amnesiac that are skeletal are just your brand of skeletal, and the songs that are skeletal on here are my brand of skeletal. Like, Backdrifts just starts with that kind of like really unsettling warbling sound that just kind of continues throughout the song. It feels like it's just like pushing into you and like massaging you, and then the sort of like electronic drum that comes in, it's just like it's like a needle like pricking at you. And I love the way that like I just kind of love the way they evoke this kind of dark atmosphere that's on like every part of the album, which I think, like, while Morgan did say that like this is an album that's kind of like easier to have a bit of fun with just because it's a little bit more energetic, I would also say it definitely like at least can put it up there with the best of them in terms of like the darkest Radiohead albums. I wouldn't say it is. Like, I'd probably say that still goes to Kid A at the end of the day. But this, to me, like, the way that it explores these is like you're listening to them build and build and build and build, and then they like always in the sort of like third act of the song, they just kind of unspool. And I love that sort of feeling of like luring you into this sort of repetition and then like very, very directly getting you right out of it. And I think it actually is done better. Like, I really do love Backdrifts, but I think the Gloaming is probably my preferred track just because it is a little bit more spacious. It's a little bit more atmospheric. It is a little bit less brittle, but I love how distant Tom sounds on this song. Like, it's just, he sounds like this mix on this song is fucking cavernous. And then you just sort of have this like brushing static pad thing, and then these like little kind of clicky little drums, and then you just sort of hear him in the background like calling, like he's being like drowned by the sound and the mix here. And I just love that atmosphere. And maybe I probably didn't latch onto it as strongly as I did like I latch onto it a lot stronger now just because I've gotten into more like overtly electronic and like IDM shit. But like, I just love the way they combine that here, because it's a progression of what they did with stuff like Idiotech or Polk Pool Revolving Doors. I get the exact same, like the feeling is being evoked there, but it's in a package that I feel I can, at least on not on, like, not talking about Kid A, but it's on a package I can appreciate a little bit more, just because I like the Gloaming is a song that just feels like I'm fucking drowning inside of it, and I love that feeling of helplessness that Tom sort of evokes with his vocals. And I also just wanted to say that I describe We Suck Young Blood as a doom metal song if the guitars were replaced with a piano, because God, what a fucking song.
Yeah,
I
I can
just
hear
needed to
what you're
mention how
saying.
much I love that one.
Something else I'll add on those two songs as well that I think contributes to the reason why I'm not super hot on them is that, again, one of my biggest issues with this record, and again, it almost feels like the kind of thing that they are, it's in the design of the album. It's just meant to be this big kind of mess. But the pacing of this record, it is frequently off to me. Like, you have a song like Sail to the Moon, which is this beautiful, ballad that comes at this perfect point early in the record. And then Go to Sleep would be a perfect pick me up after it, but then you have Backdrifts there instead, and it kind of just it sustains this unnecessary diversion. And then with the Gloaming, it's like We Suck Young Blood, which comes right before it, is this very slow, lumbering, dour song, and to go into another sort of meditative, still track like the Gloaming after it, it's too, it's it just it, the record would be so much better if you had We Suck Young Blood going into There and Sail to the Moon going into Go to Sleep. It would continue pulling you along, but there are these moments where it almost feels like it wants to throw you off, and I just lose interest completely. It's not that those aren't the
See,
only
I
two
love that they
examples either.
bridge the gap personally. That's why they work for me, is because I would feel like it would be too disorienting, because the album is already mixing all of these disparate styles and sounds and things. And it's like, you got to give me a little bit of connective tissue. And these songs really do that. And it's like, yeah, the album definitely is too long. I feel like if you removed my least favorite song, which is Punch Up at a Wedding, the album would just indisputably be better, because I think that's like the most thin, and like it's a skeletal song that doesn't work for me. It's just kind of formless in a way that I don't really care for. But everything else here, it bridges and paces itself in a way that I appreciate and that I like, because it's not like the record sounds itself are already kind of like so chaotic. So I need a little bit more there structurally for me. So it works for me there where it doesn't with you, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I kind of see what you mean. It's just I wish I felt that way, because to me it's like they don't glue the songs together. It feels like they just disrupt the whole vibe that's there, because you have this beautifully organic Sail to the Moon, and then it just like and then Go to Sleep has this organic sound as well, but it introduces glitch into it. And whereas Backdrifts is like so focused in that kind of glitchier mode, and anyway, it's just, I guess, personal taste, but
Welcome to me listening to Amnesiac.
yeah, fair enough. Morgan, what do you think about these kind of slower, more electronic tracks that dot throughout this record?
Yeah, they definitely fall in the lower half of the hypothetical track ranking for me. And I think part of that is down to sequencing. But I also I have no alternatives, and I think that deliberate wrong footing in terms of sequencing is very much intentional and helps to convey the atmosphere of the album in a really a way that I find holistically compelling, if not a bajillion percent sonically compelling. So yeah, I like those two songs pretty well.
Well, I mean, on the note of messiness, I feel like we have to talk about what might be the most contentious part of this album to me, which is, I want to be very clear about my feelings on this song, Sit Down, Stand Up, because I know you've all seen that I don't have it particularly highly rated, but my feelings on that song are much more complicated than just a rating, because I have felt basically every single possible way that a person could feel about this song over the years. I've loved it. I've hated it. I've kind of resented it. I've enjoyed it. I've thought it was passable. I've thought it was, all of these different things. And basically now where I'm at with it is that I'm kind of a bit frustrated by it. And it kind of feels like it is emblematic of my wider issue with this record. And the fact that I have an issue with it and you two, I presume, don't, perfectly reflects our respective positions on this album as well.
That is true.
Is that it starts out in this really interesting place with this very kind of colorful textures. I love the glockenspiel that is introduced in this song to dot the melody. I love the sort of kind of drawn out but slow but intense and weird and warbled vocal. It starts out in this really interesting place and it builds and builds and builds, and it introduces a lot of really interesting textures, and I'm reminded of other parts in the record that do similar things to great effect, like Where I End and You Begin, like There, like Wolf at the Door, where you're and 2 + 2 = 5, where you're having this ascending tension that is underpinned and accentuated by all of these disparate sounds that are so different and weird and esoteric and just thrown together in this way that works. And then the song just kind of collapses for me in the final hurdle. And part of this, I think, is neatly reflected in the fact that when they were recording this song and when they did interview press for this record, they made quite a point of saying, we literally had no idea how to finish this song. And so we just did this thing that was kind of a joke at first, but we ended up liking. And I understand why people like it, because I've liked it before in the past, but now where I'm at with it is it kind of fucking annoys me. And the main reason is that it feels like a bit of a cop out for the tension that's building. And also I kind of hate listening to it because it's so, that electronic stuff that comes in when he starts going raindrops is so compressed and just poorly mixed. It sounds like really just amateurish. And maybe that's, I give Radiohead credit. I don't think they're ignorant in the way that they mix their albums. I think they probably knew it would sound that way, hear it the same as me, but it just irks the shit out of me. And I find the murmuring repetition of raindrops to just be weirdly pisses me off. I don't have a good reason. This song has this great sense of instrumental complexity, right? It has this great building combination of sounds that are interesting in all the ways that Radiohead are. And it feels like they kind of just say, fuck it at a certain point and throw all of that out the window. And that's why I don't care for it. Stand up.
I think it's like the best encapsulation of the album in one song to me, because it's so atmospherically
You both agree
dense
on that, then?
for so long, and then it just shits its pants and fucking and sorry, and like again, I just find it really compelling and really darkly fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it just pushes my buttons, and I fully get why it wouldn't someone else, because it is a weird
it just doesn't
song.
sound bad to me. Like, I don't know, it just really, like, especially Tom's vocal delivery here is just like I love the just, sort of like, it's such a creepy fucking song, just the sit down, and you're just kind of like, I don't know. And I love the little triangle.
I don't want
like,
to do
it's
either.
it's just like such a detailed song, and I love every single part of it. It's just so like it's just building and building and building and rising in tension, and you're just like, oh, where are we going, and then it's just like,
yeah,
I'm like, fuck. This
it
rules.
It's like so instrumentally like massive and complex. It almost feels like Tom doesn't have much room to do anything on it. I think that's why the lyricism is so sparse on this song, especially in the build up, where he only has like really a couple of things that he says over and over, because there's not really any room for him to like do anything else, which is fine. That's fine. But it does feel like, I remember thinking that I always thought that the raindrops thing was like a total placeholder lyric, that they just never kind of figured out a way of what to do with it. And then I read an interview and he literally said, yeah, it was a placeholder lyric that we just left in there because we couldn't figure out what to do with it. And look, that's fine. Like, sometimes that shit will happen. Like, I'm going to make it through this year if it kills me from the Mountain Goats this year as a placeholder lyric. And yet it's one of the greatest lyrics of all time.
Kid A.
It's just this is a weird song where I think mainly it probably just comes down to the sound of it. like in that back half where it just grates in a way that it just, I will say there's points towards the end where Phil starts going off on the kit. You can hear him like actually doing real drum fills towards the very end of the song that I think is pretty dope. I kind of wish maybe
it's like right into the breakdown of it there.
I kind of wish that maybe that had been the focus of the breakdown, but also like there's another lyric in the song where he's like, we can wipe you out anytime, where, and that's kind of like, you know, obviously the political thing comes in there, and you could maybe read the really distorted, blown out, compressed electronic percussion that comes in to be like supposedly representing like bombs and stuff, like, you know, wreaking havoc. So, you know, look, I've tried my hardest with this song, but it's nowhere near as offensive to me as a punch up at a wedding, which look, it has a nice groove, especially when it comes in after I Will with that bum.
It has a nice groove. End statement.
Yeah, it has a nice groove.
That's all it has.
But the thing about it is that's not even the worst part of the song. The worst part of the song is the lyricism on this song, which I frankly hate. And what it is it's this song is a fucking diss track against critics. Someone wrote a bad review of a Radiohead concert, and Tom, this is not even me interpreting the song. Tom has literally said this is what it's about. Some critic wrote a really shitty review, and you know, apparently from what he said, it sounded like it was a really fucking stupid review that was really dumb about their concert, and it was a concert they were particularly proud of. And so Tom got pissed off and went in the fucking booth and spat some bars about you know, just being angry at this critic. And the thing is, like,
love Birdman.
The thing is, like, when you write this kind of song where you're specifically inspired by one thing that pissed you off, you can do it in a way where you don't have to, like, the song can be enjoyable just for that feeling. Like you don't have to necessarily interpret it as being about the critic thing, but this song makes it so obvious that it's about that I can't even give it the generosity of saying it could be interpreted in different ways, because he literally talks about the pointless snide remarks of hammer-headed sharks, the pot will call the kettle black, hypocrite opportunist.
Yeah.
It's very like, it's just a mode for Tom that doesn't work for him.
Don't be a child, dude.
Yeah.
Like, I just hate.
You are literally Radiohead.
As someone who has been both a creator and a critic in pretty much equal capacity of nobody cares. Creators who are just, you know, get mad at critics for anything other than like an attack on one's personhood. You know, get mad at that. But like anything else, grow up. Like you're Mr. Radiohead.
And look,
get a grip.
Look, I'm sure there probably are some people out there who have got a different interpretation of the song. And if so, I'd love to hear it. Genuinely, I would, because I'd love to be able to read the song in a different way. But ultimately, it's just very, like, even in spite of all that, if the song had been like really instrumentally dynamic or like really fascinating in terms of what was happening musically, then I could maybe even overlook that. But it's so stolid. And I think that is kind of like intentional, like, right? It's just like, you know, you hate what we do and we're going to fucking we're going to make you just fucking writhe in what we do for 5 minutes. And like, by the time you get to the end of the song and it's literally just that meme of no X42 over and over and over again. It's like, whatever, dude, whatever. And it's like, it's perfectly emblematic as well of like, again, I take your point that this record would be absolutely better if certain songs were culled from it. But like, I also think it could be this bloated double album thing. Just if they were more focused, I guess, musically on making it remain interesting. And this is just a moment where that repetition that I talked about, that also for me applies in a song like Backdrifts, just ultimately loses me as this song progresses, which is a shame because it kind of sounds a bit like one of my favorite Radiohead B-sides, Cut Tooth, that I talked about last week. It has the same sort of jazzy, piano heavy feel, and that song is a repetitive song too, but it just works, it builds, and it has this sense of cresting climactic triumph to it, and this song kind of just doesn't really have that, unfortunately. But yeah, there's that. I'll backstep a little bit though to say, since we're talking about whatever at this point, that I Will is a really good song. I wanted to shout out I Will because I love I Will, and I feel like no one ever talks about it. It's a perfect little shorter track, and it might be easy to overlook for that, but it's also this beautiful moment on the record that kind of encapsulates Tom's headspace as a parent, as a new parent. And because this is obviously a record where Tom's responses to this chaotic world are being filtered through the lyrics, whether he intends them to or not. And the specific aspect of him responding to the world that relates to his concern about being a new parent obviously comes through explicitly in Wolf at the Door and Sail to the Moon, but comes in a much more heartbreaking way, in simple way in I Will, where one of my favorite single lines on this whole record that I think is emblematic of the entire thing is, "I won't let this happen to my children," which is just a skin crawling moment, right? It's just this beautifully direct, blunt statement that perfectly encapsulates all of the energy that Tom brings when he talks about, social subjects or whatever. But it's there inside, it's mixed in there alongside, and that animal imagery that I talked about with white elephants and sitting ducks being referenced, and that ultimate refrain of little baby's eyes, which is really skin crawling, but also kind of beautifully ambiguous as well. Is he talking about, is it some sort of surreal, horrific image meant to make you feel terrified? Or is it him simply kind of like pleading to those people above the bunkers to think about the children? Like, is it literally him just saying, think of the children, in a way that is more moving?
Sometimes I doubt your commitment to sparkle motion.
Yeah, it's yeah, it's literally like, it's the song is literally just 2 minutes of him going, "Will someone please think of the children?" but doing it in a way that feels like heartbreaking rather than just stale. And I love that about it. It's great.
It's less think of the children because their minds will be corrupted, and think of the children because they'll fucking die.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of alludes to his own death here as well. I think "I will lay me down in a bunker underground" is kind of like him just like talking about his own death and the world, and then bringing in his children afterwards, and thinking in terms of thinking about what will be left for them when he's gone. Meet the real world coming out of your shell. Like, as you grow up, you'll have to confront these ugly things, and I'm going to try my hardest to not have to make sure that you don't have to feel the full brunt of that. But ultimately, it all comes down to whether the people who have the real power will think about the little baby's eyes. Fucking heartbreaking.
Fuck you, Bush.
Yeah, fuck Bush.
What were you
fuck
doing
Blair.
in Iraq, Bush?
Fuck
Shouldn't have
George
even been
Bush.
there in the first place, Bush.
Yeah.
Peep show.
Which is why I think, again, throwing out Punch Up at a Wedding, which meanders pointlessly, and having this song collide into Myxomatosis would be a much better sequencing decision. Myxomatosis is one of the most, I guess, affronting Radiohead songs, just because of that guitar sound. It's so
sounds sickly.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds infected, which again is that thing of like, myxomatosis is this disease that kind of it's like similar to effect in rabies and rabbits. And it just, and again, the lyrical imagery in the song of just the mongrel cat came home holding half a head, proceeded to show it off to all his newfound friends. He said, "I've been where I liked, I slept with who I liked, she ate me up for breakfast, she screwed me in a vice." Like real ugly lyrics. Like even "I sat in the cupboard and wrote it down neat. They were cheering and waving, twitching and salivating like with myxomatosis, but it got edited, fucked up, strangled, beaten up, used in a photo in Time magazine, buried in a burning black hole in Devon." So it's like this real kaleidoscope of images here of Tom in this state of just total chaos. I guess some of those lines, I guess, could be read as interpreting how people interpret his songs and how the music media and talk about him in the process of having to, shill for your art. and that refrain of "I don't know why I feel so tongue-tied," just beautifully summing it up, right? Because Saoirse talked about when we did Kid A, like how the process of doing press for OK Computer put Tom in this state where he was physically unable to communicate, entirely shut down. And Myxomatosis feels like it's a song about that, but also infused with all these other things in the record that talk about like just disgusting states of being for people in the world. And also shout out, I think, to Scatterbrain, which I feel like, weirdly enough, whenever I look at people read reviews or like look at takes online about How to the Thief, the song that gets the most shat on is this song. And I kind of get it, but I also kind of hate that because I find this song really moving. And
I just find I like the song quite a bit. I just think it's weirdly placed. Like I think
I
Myxomatosis going right into a wolf at the door would have been fucking aces.
Fair enough. I can't take that away from you. But I feel that this song is underrated and underappreciated. It's definitely a slower moment on the record. It feels like the kind of slow moment that the record absolutely needs. Perhaps one could argue that it could be better slotted in somewhere else. But it feels like you've had so much chaos, so much like Myxomatosis is one of the album's most chaotic songs, both in terms of that sound and just how all over the shop the lyrics are, as I hope that I communicated. And Scatterbrain is kind of like the aftermath of that. Like we talked about when we did our video on In Absentia by Porcupine Tree, we talked about how Creator Has a Master Tape is this chaotic fucking song where he's just everything is going crazy and he's falling apart, and then Heart Attack and a Layboy comes in and it's like, I'm so fucked up. And the Myxomatosis Scatterbrain sequencing is not to make a comparison of quality, but just to say that the sequencing here has a similar effect for me, where this is kind of like the aftermath, where you're just kind of writhing in how shit you are, basically. And that is encapsulated in just how fucking pained Tom sounds in this song. Like his vocal performance is so just upsetting, and like the way he kind of extends the lines, like when he sings Scatterbrain, he sounds like he's being torn apart, and that really gets me. I really appreciate that aspect of the song. It just wanted to ride for that one because no one ever does.
It's a good song. I have a weird problem with it. It's not Morgan's problem, but like, why do parts of this song kind of sound like if you slowed the end of Let Down by like 50%? Just a very strange thing that gets in my craw about the song, where I'm just kind of like, okay, that's weird.
Fair enough.
Again, not a bad song. I was just kind of like, huh.
Yeah, like for sure,
this
is nowhere near my favorites on this record.
It's not a bad song. It's a good song. Definitely.
I'm really coming at it in this defensive position just because I've literally never seen anyone say anything nice about it.
Yeah.
It goes into Wolf at the Door, which is, Tom York rapping, which, I don't feel like it's a
flat in your face.
I don't feel like it's a stretch to describe his vocal delivery as rapping in this song. I think he's purposefully going for that. And fuck, man, he kills it on the mic. Got bars. White boy has bars indeed. Eminem, you're nothing.
Don't you dare, don't you fucking dare.
So yeah, I love the way that the song almost feels like it's jittering between positions of like defenseless, hopeless family man who's under attack and the perspective of the attackers themselves. Again, it's like it almost has the same sort of like surreal combination of lyrics that like Kid A's cut up songs do, where it feels like lines are almost being pasted together in a random fashion. And I love that aspect of the song. It adds to, it's just killer the way that works. And just the whole backbeat is so Carnival good. House shit.
I love how like natural and almost warm it sounds, like within the mix, but like just the actual sound of the instrument itself is like nauseating.
Yeah, and because it sounds
woozy.
It sounds kind of warm or full, I guess, but the drums are so brittle in this song. Like they're really effective, but compared to that, they're really like, I guess, just sharp sounding. And it just gives that contrast between those two elements that is, the bedrock of all good rock music, basically, is the contrast between the rhythm section and the kind of main melodic core. But it's done in a really unconventional way on this song that is sick as shit. It rules. Fucking rules. Oh. Wow. So I think basically we're all kind of clear with where each other is at with Hail to the Thief.
All right, so Hail to the Thief. This is a really interesting album in Radiohead's catalog. 2 + 2 = 5, obviously just a stellar opener. I also really do love Sit Down, Stand Up, the follow-up track to that, and the unconventional beauty of ballads like Sail to the Moon really hit home for me. And you've got other standout tracks like There, Where I End, and Wolf at the Door that are just way too good, and some of their best songs up to this point. I really do love the political leanings of a lot of these tracks. I think it gives this album its very own distinct identity in the catalog up to this point. I think that's what its greatest strength is. Of course, the very current political leanings, with the Hail to the Thief being an obvious reference to George Bush and the signs that would be held up at protester demonstrations of him stealing the election. Then there's the electronic elements of this album, which I think don't work terribly well. Like tracks like Backdrafts and The Gloaming, I think end up feeling a little awkward and clunky in the album's track list. Then there's Mixomatosis, which, while I really do love the big, exciting, almost power electronics influences present on this track, I can't help but say I find the lyrics quite eye-rolling here. Then we've got Punch Up at a Wedding. It feels so anonymous in the Radiohead catalog at this point that I cannot really even muster up a lot of memory of it. And there's kind of the other thing about this album. It's the longest thing they've made up to this point, and that sprawling length and track list of 14 songs in nearly 1 hour of runtime does serve as a great strength and great weakness, because I find there's a pretty even split of great tracks that are really captivating and compelling, and ones that are just really forgettable, and I can't think of the reason they're included in there. But I guess I did like this as almost a transitionary moment, I hate to say, because it is coming off of the heels of an already very messy and kind of unkempt album, and is also in a very similar vein, messy and unkempt. But for what it was, I did like a lot of this, even if I do have my problems with it. I would give it like a 6.5 out of 10.
I think that really it just comes down to a matter of like, there's these two albums that we've reviewed these past 2 weeks are they have a lot of similar problems, but I think it comes down to the fact that, like, for me anyway, Hail to the Thief works because whenever they're doing anything in like a given moment, I feel like Hail to the Thief is a more confident record. I feel like they know what they're doing, and even if what they're doing is occasionally kind of, a little bit bad, like on Punch Up at a Wedding, it still yields far more success than failure. Whereas with Amnesiac, I feel like they knew a little bit less of what they were doing, and it's just sort of like, how many hits are personally going to be scored with you, the listener, with those approaches? It's just like, do you want the more confident, fully formed album that's a little bit misguided, or do you want the kind of wilder and not necessarily like half formed, but the album that's just inherently a little bit less full, but takes a few more like stabs at something a little bit more maybe generally exciting or different from the band, and then you just kind of fall down where you fall down on those two.
Yeah, I think you pretty much. I know it's a shitty word, and we both know that's kind of annoying to have to use
Yeah.
it. But I think you basically did nail it when you said "Hail to the Thief" is kind of transitional. It
Yeah.
it is, again, Radiohead. It's a necessary record for Radiohead, and I think it's a pretty good execution of the idea of this record at this point in their career, of the idea of a record that kind of clears the slate after a particularly dramatic diversion for them. And it's kind of like it clears the slate. It allows them to start taking stock of their musical identity and what the future might hold for them. And the next record we're going to talk about next week, in Rainbows, I don't think really could exist in the form it does without that slate clearing that Hail to the Thief represents, without that ability for them to like let out all of this energy, let out all of these things that they need to let out on this album. And so it's hard for me to even be mad at the weakest parts of this record, because it does just feel like a natural, necessary exercising of those feelings. And that, especially again, when you're the biggest band in the world and you have this certain level of expectation on you, there must be something satisfying about just saying fuck it, going into a studio for 2 weeks and just jamming and throwing whatever comes out. There's something, I think, satisfying about the fuck you nature of that, of just doing that, of saying fuck it and doing it.
Totally.
So I respect this album a lot, even if it is one of my lowest ranked Radiohead albums.
Favorite tracks and ratings?
Indeed.
Yeah, boy.
Jake, why don't you kick us off?
My favorite track is the incomparable Sail to the Moon. I'm also going to throw in The Gloaming because I really, really do love that song. And part of me just wants to be a fucking contrarian and say sit down, stand up, because I do fucking love that song. But I really got to give it to Wolf at the Door. This is like a record that just begins and ends fucking fabulously. And least favorite, consider Punch Up at a Wedding the hunting bears of this album, and that it's just fucking useless.
Ouch.
I hope we have some Punch Up at a Wedding defenders in our comments, or like contacting us in some way, because I feel like we definitely represent the minority view on that song.
I feel like maybe we'll get like a letter, just be like, I'm gonna fucking come to your house and then I'll punch you up at a wedding, bitch.
Do it.
Joke's on you. I'm never getting married.
Oh shit! Fuck! Gonna die
I'm
alone.
intolerable to live with.
Yo. And I give the album an 8 out of 10.
Sick.
My
Sick.
3 favorites are There, 2 + 2 = 5, and could completely before I knew that this would be a contrarian take, I had Sit Down, Stand Up as my 3rd favorite, and I will keep that there.
Woo.
Yeah, least favorite's gotta be your punch ups. It's gotta be your worst scene in Inarritu's Birdman, and I will give it an 8.5 out of 10.
My 3 favorite tracks are Where I End and You Begin, There, and 2 + 2 = 5. Easy. Don't even have to think. It's definitely those 3. Least favorite, Punch Up. And I'm going to give this record a 7 out of 10. Please let us know in the comments below what you think of Hail to the Thief, what you think of our takes on Hail to the Thief. We definitely had some hot takes in this video, so please let us know if you disagree. If you have any differing perspectives on any of these songs, let us know as well in the comments below. Also, in the description, you'll find a link to the playlist for our other episodes in the Radiohead Retrospective. This was admittedly one of our more low-key episodes, since we only had 3 people, but some of them get pretty heated, some of them get pretty deep, and I'm sure next week's one on In Rainbows will be a heady combination of both of those things. So stick around for that as well. Check out our other videos that we have out this week. We've just done Record Club episodes on broken social scenes, You Forgot It, and People. We've just done another Record Club episode on Porcupine Trees in Absentia. And you can also check out my newly uploaded ranking of the XTC albums as well, which will also be online now by the time that this video is posted. So yeah, there's that.
Justice for English settlement.
I do my best. Rock over London. Rock on Chicago. Bush did 9/11.